I'm a therapist who has struggled to manage my own mental health since I was so young that I didn't even know what therapy was. And when I learned about therapy, I was so excited and I was so hopeful and I was so optimistic. I could not believe that there was an entire field dedicated to helping people dealing with the kind of things that I was dealing with, and that there was science behind it and graduate training programs behind it. And I thought, that's amazing that people like me don't have to suffer alone and don't have to suffer in silence, that there is hope and there are answers out there. I knew I wanted to be a part of it. I knew I wanted to be a therapist. And once I got to the degree where I started actually meeting therapists and working in hospitals and private practices and kind of seeing behind the curtain, so to speak, see how much planning and preparation and thought was put into the care of people who came to need help with therapy, and how the people who were helping manage their own mental health, my feelings about therapy changed dramatically. Therapy did not look the way I imagined, and the people practicing it were not the people I thought they were going to be. For the most part, there were some exceptions. But the general feeling that I kept getting and could not shake was that the people who designed these treatments and the people who were executing these treatments and practicing them didn't really understand the people who they were helping, at least not to the degree where they could really actually help them. And that there was this gap, there was this mismatch between the experience and skills and knowledge of the people in the helping roles and the needs of the people in the being helped roles. I know that the majority of you watching this or listening to this are probably not therapists. And so if you're thinking, well, this is, maybe it's interesting to hear this guy's controversial opinions or whatever, but why should I care? Because if you've ever been in therapy, are in therapy, or are thinking about being in therapy in the future, I want you to know that it isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It often feels that way, but there is a diverse range of perspectives and opinions and strategies out there in the world of therapy. And a lot of the more common prevailing practices, I think, are ineffective for many, if not most, of the people who are seeking help. If you are frustrated with your experiences with the world of professional mental health so far, I want you to know that you're not alone, and even some of the people on the other side of it, so to speak, the professionals like me, agree with you and are trying to change things and are trying to make a difference. And just so you know, when I say controversial opinions about therapy, I'm not kidding. What you're going to hear from me today isn't just like, oh, some therapists aren't very good. These are legitimately controversial opinions. There are a lot of people in my field who don't like me, who think I'm a problem, who disagree with me, and some are even trying to take me down, frankly. So these are not popular opinions, and they are things that I believe in. They are feelings and values that I hold on to very deeply. But there are a lot of people in my field who don't like me and don't like my approach. And I almost changed careers at one point because I had so many style clashes with managers and bosses and supervisors when I was in training that for a long time I thought maybe my approach doesn't work for this field. Maybe I am not meant for this kind of work. So, first controversial opinion about therapy. Your therapist needs to be able to do more than to just listen, reflect, and reframe. Now, they do need to do those things. Those are important components of therapy. Your therapist needs to pay attention to you. They need to actually be able to understand what you're saying, and they need to be able to articulate that back to you, essentially to prove to you that they understand what you're saying and to continue the flow of conversation. So those are part of it. There are many, many therapists out there who think that what I just said is literally their entire job. That if they just do those things, you, through the process of talking about your own stuff, will come to your own conclusions and solve your own problems, and that is their job and that is their role. And I strongly, strongly disagree with that. I know that when I was at my worst, if I showed up to therapy and someone did that, I would have gotten nothing out of it. Because I was lost, I was broken, I literally didn't know how to live. I didn't know how to take care of myself. I didn't know how to talk to people. I did not know how to function. Now, it's not necessarily a therapist's job to teach you all of those things, but there are so many people out there who are on that level of, and I'm talking about me, so I hope this isn't an offensive way to phrase it, but that level of brokenness. I was on that level of brokenness, and someone just saying back to me, oh, that sounds hard. Oh, I hear you. Oh, I'm so sorry. It doesn't do anything to a person in that place because it doesn't give a sense of direction. It doesn't give solutions. It doesn't give goals. And a huge part of what I do with my therapy clients is say, okay, you are here. That's the first part. I hear you. Where do you want to be? And then let's work together to plot out the path from here to there. It's like, imagine if someone says, so I live in Iowa. Imagine someone says, I live in Iowa. I don't like Iowa. And you just say, oh, Iowa's hard, huh? Oh, you don't like being in Iowa? Iowa's not a good place to live. What does that do? This person wants to go somewhere else. And eventually, maybe you figure out, okay, I think I'd be happier if I lived in California. Well, now we say, okay, you need to go east then. We maybe don't know the exact roads yet, but we know where you want to be. We know what direction it is in from where you are right now. Now let's work together to plot out the pathway from here to there. That, in my opinion, is a big part of what therapy should include. And if your therapist can't do those things with you, unless you're already very high functioning and you're just kind of in therapy for like life fulfillment purposes, it's probably not going to do a ton for you. Second controversial opinion is that under certain circumstances, it is okay for therapists to give direct advice. Most therapists are terrified to give direct advice, like to say, you should do this thing or you should not do this thing. And we're terrified of it because we've been told to be terrified of it, because we've been told in graduate school that therapy isn't about telling people what to do, and that if you ever tell people what to do, you're a bad therapist, and you're probably going to be legally liable for any damages that might arise in their life from giving that advice. Now, there are a lot of areas where we should not give advice. I don't know who you should date or marry. I don't know what house you should live in. I don't know what you should do for a living. I can maybe help you figure those things out, but I'm not going to say you should definitely be with this person and not this person unless the second person is abusive. Then I will say that. Otherwise, I don't know. I'm not a psychic, but there are some things I know. There are things I know will make a difference in a person's mental health. And we all know this. This is general knowledge within our field, and we're so afraid to share it. For example, I know that if your sleep sucks, you're going to be more depressed and anxious. And so if your sleep sucks and you come to me and tell me your sleep sucks, I will tell you we should work on sleep hygiene. I will tell you you should go to bed earlier. That's direct advice. And I'm going to give that to you because it is stupid of me to withhold that from you. Because if I know something factually, scientifically, that will improve your mental health symptoms, and I don't tell you that because I'm afraid that that's not how a therapist should talk, why am I holding back from you? Why am I keeping things from you that could benefit you? There are some things that we do know. Mental health is a very ambiguous field. There's a lot of unanswered questions. There's a lot of mysteries. There's a lot of data we don't have yet, but we don't know nothing. There are things we do know. And things, or we know that physical activity dramatically improves mood and stress and anxiety and cognitive functioning. And so if I have people on my caseload who are sedentary, I'm going to tell them, like, you should be more physically active. I'm not going to tell them what to do. I'm not going to make a workout plan for them. I'm not a personal trainer. But I am going to say, you should use your body more, because your brain is like withering away inside your body that never moves and never does anything. So therapists can give advice under certain circumstances, and there are circumstances when I think not doing that is actually harmful to the client. Third controversial opinion, self-disclosure can be appropriate and powerful if done right. So self-disclosure is, to use younger person phrasing, it's when your therapist does a lore drop. Like when I say something a little bit about my personal life, my mental health, my whatever. Now, this is also one of the things that grad school basically says, don't ever do this or you're a horrible person, and you'll lose the frame of the session, and your client will start to caretake you and they won't see you as a therapist anymore. I'm sure that happened to someone somewhere. If you follow certain parameters and guidelines with self-disclosure, the risks of that happening are minimal to non-existent. I don't mind telling people that I have a wife or kids, or that I feel stress sometimes, or that I have dealt with insomnia, for example, because we also know that your relationship with your therapist, whether or not you feel like they understand you, they get you, they listen when you talk, all of these things are absolutely critical to achieving positive outcomes from therapy. So if we know that the quality of the therapeutic relationship between provider and client is critical to therapeutic outcomes, my question then would become, how do you form a relationship with someone if they know nothing about you? If you refuse to disclose anything, which is what a lot of therapists do, How can you have a relationship with a brick wall or a robot? The answer, of course, is you can't. And so self-disclosure is this weird place where we're trying to hybridize like the origins in the field, which is like Freudian psychoanalysis, where the therapist is a blank slate and like the client maybe doesn't even look at the therapist and lays on a couch looking at the ceiling. And what research tells us, which is that, yeah, you need to have a relationship with this person if you want to get better. And we're trying to match these up and they don't match up real well. And that's because a lot of the origins of our field were just based on nothing. They're based on people's opinions and just what they thought they should do. And we need to update and modify some of our beliefs about therapy. Now, I said I do have parameters around self-disclosure. I'll talk about past issues. I won't talk about present issues. If I've got something stressing me out right now, like it's a problem for me today, I'm not going to talk about that with my therapy client. That is inappropriate. I also try to use more of a show, don't tell model, which is kind of a linguistic term if you're familiar with it. So like, rather than me saying, I know what it's, I say it on here. So like a lot of my therapy clients probably know it anyway, which is kind of funny. But rather than me say like, yeah, I know what depressive episodes are like. I had a depressive episode that lasted a decade. Rather than me saying like, I am on XYZ medication, I can say things when you're talking to me that cause you to realize that I get it on a level beyond theoretical without me literally just like listing my diagnoses to you. And I do believe that that level of self-disclosure where you show but don't tell, where just through your phrasing and your general communication with a person, they can tell you at least have experienced your own version of what they're feeling. You have demons that are at least cousins of their demons. You can communicate that to a person. And I think you should when it's appropriate and when it's helpful, because it can strengthen the efficacy of the therapeutic relationship. Now, really quick, one aspect of therapy that isn't controversial, or at least it shouldn't be, because clinical trials have demonstrated it over and over and over again, is that your rapport and whether or not you click with your therapist is absolutely critical to you getting what you want from therapy. It is, in most cases, considered to be the most important factor. Way more important than what their degrees are in, where they went to school, what special CEUs they've had. It's basically just, do you like them? Do you get along with them? And do you generally enjoy talking to them? That is why I am a huge advocate for the sponsor of today's video, Grow Therapy. Grow Therapy is a platform that allows potential therapy clients to browse a directory of thousands of diverse therapists to find somebody who they feel like would be a good fit. And once you find that person, you can book directly into their schedule with minimal wait times. Grow Therapy offers both in-person and telehealth appointments. So if you'd rather see someone face-to-face, you can do that. If you'd rather do therapy from the comfort of your own home, you can do that too. And they are not, this is really important, because some of you asked me about this last time, Grow Therapy is not one of those impossible to cancel subscription services. This is just a pay-as-you-go model, just like it would be if you came into the North Star Psychological Center and saw a therapist here. You pay per session. To learn more about Grow Therapy, head to the link in my description or scan the QR code on the screen for a quicker way to get support and find a therapist. Fourth controversial opinion, how did that make you feel, is not always a very useful question. If you've ever been to therapy, it's the most cliche thing in the world. You talk about an experience you've had, a thing that you went through, and you're describing it, like factually, like this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And the therapist says, how did that make you feel? It's designed to be a tool to increase emotional communication, to help you gather insight. The thing is, I have found that most of the time, people already know how they feel. I have a handful of clients who really struggle with emotional identification, and they talk about their experiences like they're reading a novel about someone else's life, and they don't connect with their own emotions. At least me personally, I don't get a lot of those people. Most of the people who I work with who don't explicitly say, and then I was sad after telling me about an obviously sad thing that happened, is because they already know that they felt sad about it. And they have enough respect for me to assume that I also understand how they felt about that thing, because we have, as we talked about in the previous item, rapport and mutual understanding. And so if I were to say, how did that make you feel? They already know. So they're just like, well, it made me sad. And I also already know. So they're not communicating it to me. And it basically just creates this weird speed bump in their processing of things that they have been through. I'm not saying don't ever do it. There are situations where it's appropriate, but there are therapists who use this thing like it's a meme and it's just their response to everything. And there's only, in my opinion and experience, a relatively small handful of the treatment seeking population who really needs to be consistently asked that question. Most of the time, if they're not telling you how you feel, it's because they think you already know, because they think you're smart and they think you understand them. And if you don't, this isn't always the best way to get at that. And if you always just say it in the same way, it just gets really annoying and it feels like a catchphrase. Fifth controversial opinion. Your therapist should be in, and I'm using my language very carefully here, your therapist should be in a pretty good place with their own mental health. Pretty good. I am not saying they need to be the paragon of every aspect of thought challenges and behavioral activation. But if your therapist is actively struggling with symptoms of a mental illness, how are they demonstrating to you that their techniques actually work? Because if the things that they're doing with you and teaching you are effective at managing the symptoms of the condition that you're coming to them for help with, shouldn't it also be managing their own symptoms? I mean, if you think about this with any other field, if you were seeking a financial advisor, would you want to talk to a financial advisor who is in severe debt? Presumably not, because if they were that good at figuring out what to do with money, why aren't they doing it with themselves? Why aren't they using these tools and this knowledge in their own life to improve their own situation? You can think of that with anything. There's also just an important element of modeling to it. I think the reason a lot of you like me and find value in my content is because I have, shown and not told you. You believe I'm someone who understands you to a degree and has been through things that are kind of like what you've been through, and that's good. But you also look at me now and believe he's, for the most part, not there anymore. And so to see, even just through my words, that I've had a journey from a place somewhat like the place that you are in right now to a place somewhat like the place you might want to be in someday, and that it appears valid and genuine, is motivating. Is hopefully it like creates hope in you that, oh, people like me can have a good life, can achieve things. Because I used to think it wasn't possible. I used to think there was like this divide in society where there's people like me who are born with just this screwed up stuff and we're just like doomed forever. And then there's the people who have, jobs and families and houses and stuff, and they've always had a good life and they've never faced stuff like what I've faced, and we're just permanently put into these two class systems. And that's not the case. And a person's life can be testimony to that. But if a therapist, and again, I'm not saying you can't struggle with anything. Like I myself do not experience perfect mental health to this day. I still have challenges. I still have struggles. But most of the time I'm okay. And if a therapist is actively, consistently struggling with their own mental health symptoms, I think that can be harmful. I think that can be demotivating. I think it can increase feelings of hopelessness. And I also think it's probably going to impair the efficacy of that provider. So therapists should be semi-okay, at least. Number 6 is that it is okay to work on logistical things in therapy. What I mean by logistical things, I'll give you a few examples of some things I've done in therapy. I have helped people go through weeks of unopened mail because their anxiety was so bad that they couldn't bring themselves to open the mail, or their executive functioning was so screwed up from loss of sleep or depression or whatever that they couldn't figure out what they needed to do with the mail. They couldn't make a to-do list of like, okay, I have these bills to pay, I need to call this person. I have helped people apply for jobs before. I have helped people make phone calls before. I have helped people listen to voicemails before. These are all, in my opinion, perfectly appropriate uses of therapy because these are barriers to a person experiencing improved mental health that they need support in overcoming. And I know so many therapists who would say, that's not therapy. That's case management. That's social work. That's just being a friend. To which I would say, well, a lot of these people don't have any of those things, so maybe sometimes I need to step into that role too. But I believe that the role of a therapist, maybe I should have led with this. This in and of itself is controversial, and this isn't one of the 13. I think the job of a therapist is to help their therapy clients decrease the symptoms of mental illness. That's what I think our job is. And I wouldn't think that's controversial, but a lot of people won't do things like give advice or help people with logistical things that would clearly move the needle in that direction because they don't think it's part of therapy. They think it's somebody else's job or whatever the reason. I have gotten into so many online debates with people about whether or not it's appropriate to help people with things like this. And I've seen therapists say, well, that doesn't help them with insight. That doesn't help them with self-awareness. And I'm like, that's not the only thing therapy can do. The goal of therapy, if you align with me, that the goal of therapy is to help that person reduce the symptoms of their mental illness, then all of those things can absolutely be appropriate uses of therapy. On a related note, I'm getting a little heated. I should have known that was going to happen with this topic. My 7th controversial opinion, insight is overrated and excessive focus on the self can actually be harmful. So many therapy techniques are all about getting the person to be more aware of themselves, to understand themselves better, to have more insight into their past and their thoughts and their feelings and behaviors. And we need some of that. Like if a person genuinely lacks those things, has like none of them, that's important. That person is going to need some help and some support from a therapist on that. But there's a cap. There's a point at which, actually I would go so far as to say it's a bell curve. And I bet many of you relate to what I'm about to say. There comes a point where being so hyper aware of your own thoughts and feelings and origin story and everything that happens inside of you not only stops being beneficial to get more of it, it becomes a detriment. And at least for me, like I am hardwired that way. I was born with an uncomfortable and maladaptive degree of self-awareness. I overthink everything I say. I overthink everything I do. I overthink everything I've already done. My brain, if I leave it to its own devices and don't try to direct it or manage it, is basically a constant replay of what I'm doing, what I have done, whether or not that's good or bad. It's just this endless ruminative cycle of focusing on me. And it can become so harmful. It can be so harmful when all you think about in a day is your own internal processes. I think that the amount of insight we often as therapists encourage people to develop borders on like self-obsession. I'm not going to say narcissism because that's a very cliche term and it means a lot of things people don't think it means. I don't actually see a lot of people who like fall in love with themselves and they think they're ultra important or whatever. They just devote too many resources to paying attention to their own internal mental and emotional processes. And we shouldn't do that. We should not sit around and hyperanalyze and micromanage every little thing that happens inside of us. You will have no life if you do that. And at some point, those things only matter if they lead to effective action and if they lead to change. And just becoming the expert on yourself for no reason and changing nothing about your life, that doesn't benefit you. And to my previous point, which was a sub-point of another point, it doesn't necessarily decrease your symptoms of mental illness. In fact, it can increase them. How many anxious people have low self-awareness? I'm sure it's not zero. It's a low number. It's a low, low number. The vast majority of anxious people I know are more self-aware than the average person already. Hyper self-aware in many cases, and that's actually where some of the anxiety comes from. Many of these people would be better served by thinking about themselves less, not more. And if therapy only goes one direction, it's only going to help a small fraction of the treatment-seeking population. Number 8, talking about the present is usually more valuable than talking about the past because you have no agency over history. So many therapists I know are so obsessed with trying to tie something that happened to you in your past to something that's going on today. I have 2 big problems with this. The first is you often can't do it. People are more complicated than that. Like we are not as simple as my mom said X mean thing to me, so now I have Y pattern. It's not a one-to-one. There are billions of moving parts in your life. And you're almost never going to be able to draw an exact correlation, let alone causation, between a thing that happened in your past and a thing you struggle with today. It's not 1-to-1. It's like 1,000,000 to 1. The second reason I am against this is even if you do figure it out, even if you unwrap that spider's web of like, because XYZ happened to me at ages 6, 7, and 9, I now am a people pleaser. Okay, does that change anything? Are you now not a people pleaser because you know why you're a people pleaser? Or are you still the exact same person and just a little bit more aware of why you're that person? You don't actually need to know why you are the way you are to stop being the way you are. If you're, and this is just a random example, if you're a people pleaser, you don't need to know why. You just need to know how to not be. You need to know how it's screwing up your life and how not to be. If you're a passive communicator, you need to learn how to practice assertive communication. You don't need to dig into your entire history to figure out what happened to me to make me a passive communicator. You just need to practice assertive communication. Like, imagine if I were a personal trainer. Okay, my brother is a personal trainer, so he'll get a good laugh at this if he's watching this. And you come to me and we're doing a bench press, and I notice your grip on the bar is wrong and it's going to hurt your wrists. And I say to you, why do you hold the bar like that? Like, what did you, when you were 9 years old, did something fall on you and you grabbed it like that, and now you automatically hold things like that when they're on top of you so that you don't die? It doesn't matter. You just need to hold it differently. I don't know what I'm doing with my wrists right now. It looks like I'm driving an invisible motorcycle right now. I don't know what I was trying to do there. But the point is, you just need to change the thing that's hurting you. You don't need to know why. In most cases, there are some times when you do, but not every time. And in my opinion, not the majority of the time. And talking about the past is really overrated. Unless you're like processing trauma or something. Like, don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. But therapy tends to have an obsessive focus in the past that I think keeps people stuck there, and that's not where we need to be. Number 9, most people who think they have imposter syndrome don't have imposter syndrome. They're just new to some certain status in their life. And this is not a pedantic point. People overpathologize normal struggles and normal emotions. When I've owned my own business for, it is September, so 21 months I've been a business owner. There are days when I wake up and think, should I really be in charge of a business? Should I be training people? Should I really be responsible for all this? And if I went into therapy, they'd be like, oh, that's your imposter syndrome. No, I'm new. I've owned a business for less than 2 years. There's a steep learning curve to this, and I really genuinely don't know what I'm doing in many areas. I don't need someone to pathologize that or to coddle me and say, you're actually so capable. You just haven't realized it yet. No, I'm not. I'm a newbie as a business owner. This thing, you could do this for 30 years and still not feel like you know what you're doing. Or like you bring your kid home from the hospital, on the first day that your child is born. Well, not, you know what I mean. You don't actually bring them home the first day. Segue avoided. And, you hold them in your arms and you put them to sleep in their crib for their first time. And then you go to your own bed and you're like, what in the hell? Like, I am responsible for a human life other than my own. And you go to therapy and they're like, oh, you're going to be a wonderful parent. That's imposter syndrome. Hopefully you are going to be a wonderful parent. That's not imposter syndrome. You're new. You don't know what you're doing, and it's hard. And so many times in life, like I see this on therapist forums, I see people in their internship. So like their first year of therapy, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. And people say, you have imposter syndrome. They don't know what they're doing. They're new. And this is hard. It's over and over and over again. I see this. Imposter syndrome is real. It does happen to people, but not every experience of inadequacy or insecurity is imposter syndrome. And sometimes those feelings need to be addressed not by thinking your way out of them, but by doing the thing more or gaining more experience so that you actually start to believe that you're competent in it because you have done it more. We need to prove to ourselves through data and evidence and experience that we're actually okay at the thing before we feel comfortable about it. And that's normal and healthy and appropriate to be insecure about something that you're new at. Number 10, your therapist should have a plan for therapy and should be able to articulate that plan to you. This kind of relates to number 1, but it's said differently, and it's important to clarify. There are a lot of therapists whose plan for people is, I'm going to show up. This is a phrase that I hate and it gets thrown out. I'm going to hold space for you. I'm going to dedicate an hour of my week to being your hour where I will listen to you and you will be here and we will both be present together. And again, you should do those things. Those are necessary conditions for therapy to work. That in and of itself is not a plan. That is literally just you existing and being alive and paying attention to somebody else, which is a good start. And there are many people who don't get that from anyone else in their lives. And so that is an incredibly valuable thing. But that in and of itself is not a plan. Because if you have the same plan for every person, you are completely neglecting the diversity of mental illness and human experience. If you think all people that come to you actually just need the same thing, no, they don't. No, they don't. Because this is so different from one person to the next. And again, I know this because I've been the person in the other chair. I've been the person who is broken and lost and struggling, and I know that wouldn't have really made any difference for me whatsoever. Because I didn't have the answers waiting inside of myself just to be discovered. I didn't already know what I was supposed to do and just needed someone to confirm it to me through validation. I needed serious, intensive help. And many, many people are there, and many, many therapists don't provide that, and it's this mismatch that completely screws up people's perceptions of what therapy can be. Number 11, it is sometimes okay for the therapist to work harder than the client. So this is another therapy catchphrase, never work harder than your client. There's two important things to consider here, though. What is work and who is your client? So when a therapist is working, what we're doing is listening, paying attention, thinking, feeling, being present. These are elements of our work, remembering things people have said to us, etc. And our clients are people with depression, people with anxiety, people with ADHD, children sometimes, people with trauma. So if you fill in those blanks, never work harder than your client, what you end up with is never have a longer attention span than a child. Never be more present than someone who has PTSD and is dissociated. Never be more motivated or more optimistic than a depressed person. And when you actually fill in those vague cliche words with the reality of the work that we do, they suddenly sound ridiculous. Now again, I'm not saying the opposite is true. I'm not saying you should make it your mission in life, like every second of your day should be devoted to becoming a therapist and you should have no life outside of therapy. No, of course not. That's a terrible idea, and that would make you a terrible therapist if you did that because you'd have no balance. But sometimes people need you to show up in a way that no one else has ever showed up before. Guarantee you, if you'd put me in therapy when I was 13, I probably wouldn't have talked the first session. And what a lot of therapists will do if the client won't talk is they also won't talk. That wouldn't have helped me. I would have hated that. We would have just stared at each other. That's stupid. That's not therapy. It doesn't do anything. Sometimes the therapist needs to work harder than the client, at least for acute periods of time. Number 12, challenging someone can be supportive, and agreeing with someone can be harmful. A therapist should not just be a validation dispenser. A therapist should not blindly affirm every single feeling you have and choice you make and response you have because you're wrong sometimes, because you're a human being, because we're all wrong sometimes. And if a therapist always tells you you're in the right, everybody else is wrong, every feeling you have and every way you react on that feeling is valid and appropriate, you don't have a therapist, you have a yes man. You have a lackey. You have someone who's not going to tell you when you need to change an approach. You have someone who's not going to tell you when you aren't being effective. You have someone who's not going to help you identify your own flaws and blind spots in life, which you do have, as do I, as does everybody else out there. So if your therapist is too afraid or it's just not their personality or whatever to ever challenge you or push back on anything you've said, you're going to hit a wall with them and they're not going to be able to help you very much. And number 13. The only resistant or willful clients are the ones who are not in therapy. This is a term that drives me nuts. I'll hear therapists talking about their clients who are resistant to therapy. If they're spending an hour of their day or week talking to you, and probably some of their money as well in most cases, they're not resistant. Maybe you're just not clicking with them. Maybe you aren't understanding where their frustration comes from. Maybe you aren't explaining your ideas thoroughly enough, or the research or the science behind them or the physiology behind them for them to actually feel like it's going to make a difference and feel motivated to take action. Maybe you aren't modeling the things you're trying to get them to do. There can be a billion reasons why a person isn't following through on your ideas. But if they're actually willful or resistant, they're just going to ghost you and they're not going to come anymore. If they're showing up, that means they do think you have something of value to offer them and they want to get something from you. They want to learn from you. They want to be helped by you, and you just haven't figured out how to do it yet. So I don't think it's appropriate to call someone who is showing up and is at least trying, and remember that trying for them might look different than trying for you. I don't think we should call those people willful or resistant. We can call them lost maybe or stuck, but it's not their fault. It's not. They are trying. Them showing up is trying. Those are my 13 controversial, I have way more actually, but those are my top 13 today. Controversial opinions about therapy. Hopefully you got something valuable out of this content. One last shout out to Grow Therapy for sponsoring this video. If you are at all interested in therapy and you think that the therapist you might be looking for is kind of a needle in a haystack situation and is going to be kind of a special type person, I think your odds are best there because you can look at such a wide range of people rather than just like the 5 people that one agency employs or whatever. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.